Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you with Arcadia Economics on Tuesday, March 6th. And today we have a special guest, my good friend and host of Denver Talk radio shows. I've appeared on his show a couple times, Business for Breakfast on 1690 KDMT. He also does a show on 710 KNUS. This is Jimmy Sengenberger, and today he's going to break down the whole Uranium One scandal for us a bit today. So, Jimmy, can you hear me, and are you there?
I'm good. I hope I'm not echoing for you.
Nope, you sound great, my friend. And wanted to have you on here just because I've been learning a little bit and following the reports I read, which certainly is some pretty stunning stuff. Usually when you walk down the street, mention it to someone, they think you're insane, which is why I wanted to bring you on here. I know you've looked into this a bit, and give people just a general overview and perhaps things they can look up. And just to start it off, and then I'll let you take it away, there's a researcher named Jerome Corsi. Listening to an interview with him yesterday, and they asked him to describe the situation in as few words as possible. So I'd love to get your take on this to kick things off. He said the Clintons allowed Russia to gain 20% of the U.S. uranium market in exchange for payoffs to the Clinton Foundation in the millions of dollars, while making sure that Robert Mueller suppressed from the public and the CFIUS committee knowledge of bribery schemes and other money laundering Russia was actively conducting in the United States, knowing the Clintons and Obamas would not shut them down, prosecute them, or otherwise do anything to upset the Clintons. So with that said, take it away, Jimmy. Let me know if you agree, disagree with Corsi, and anything else you'd like to share today.
There is a lot that he's kind of just drawing conclusions for that may well be true in terms of the Clintons and a pay-for-play scandal that's going on here, but let's break it down. In 2013, there was a Russian government-backed company called Rosatom, and it acquired a Canadian uranium mining company. It's now called Uranium One. It's got key assets in the United States, and of course, uranium is a key ingredient to making nuclear weapons. We all know that. While the company reportedly extracts only about 11% of its nuclear material, uranium, from the United States right now, it earned the capacity to extract as much as 20%. So that part of Corsi's statement is definitely true.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's interesting is how this agreement was approved by 9 different agencies, including the State Department. Now, this was 2013 time period. Who was Secretary of State then? It was Hillary Clinton. Now, this agency, of course, or this group of agencies really were involved in determining what would be allowed and what wouldn't be allowed for this deal to go through. Now, Hillary Clinton, it's important to be clear, she's denied any personal involvement in the agreement, but around this time, her husband, former President Bill Clinton, received $500,000, 500 grand, for speaking fees in Russia. He also had the opportunity to meet with Vladimir Putin, and also a number of Uranium One investors reportedly donated millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation. So there's obviously some questions there in terms of the Clinton involvement and what they were looking for in terms of some engagement. There is some supposition on the part of Corsi in that regard to say there was definitely a pay for play. I don't think we know that definitively. We just know that there is a lot around it that doesn't pass the smell test, that does seem to be demonstrating some sort of pay for play. And that's really the basic background of the Uranium One scandal. There's a lot more to it, though, that we can get into.
Okay, well, why don't we start with what has been confirmed, because I think that's one of the challenges today. There's so much information out there. We hear Mueller's doing investigations of Trump, and so there's so many conflicting views. What can we say, at least as much as possible, has been confirmed? There's evidence that, we hear a lot about the WikiLeaks. So what do we know that we can say somewhat for certain at this point?
Well, in this regard, everything I just reported seems to be known for certain. But what's also known is that the FBI looked into the agreement and they found that some Russian nuclear industry officials were involved in dealings like bribery, extortion, kickbacks, other things, according to The Hill. So then The Hill is a prominent Washington publication. And so the FBI looking deeply into these things, and what they found was, some dirty stuff. In fact, a guy named Vadim Mikarin, he's the Russian official who oversaw Vladimir Putin's nuclear expansion in the U.S. He was eventually thrown into jail, sentenced to prison. He was discovered by the FBI before the deal was approved. So they knew about this guy who was involved with Putin in expanding Russian uranium assets in the United States, nuclear assets in the United States, before the Uranium One deal was approved by those federal government agencies. But the FBI may not have notified those agencies of their findings. And so that part of Corsi's statement is also true, is that it looks like the FBI, the Department of Justice, did not notify the higher-ups. Now, who was investigating, who was leading that investigation at the time, I'll get back to this in a moment, is Robert Mueller, who is the guy who's responsible right now for overseeing, as special counsel, the Trump-Russia collusion narrative. So this whole idea that Russia was involved in the 2016 elections, which quite definitively they were, but there's also this question of whether or not there was collusion with the Trump administration, which I don't buy a word of, but that's beside the point. So Republicans did try to stop the deal, but the Justice Department concealed a lot of the factors that they knew, just as I mentioned. And this way, there were a lot of agencies involved, so it's not just a Clinton scandal, it's also an Obama administration scandal, as Andrew McCarthy, a former federal prosecutor, pointed out in the National Review. Then there's this FBI informant. Now, this isn't known for factual, but this is something that was presented to a Senate committee and 2 House committees. His name is Douglas Campbell, and he gave them a 10-page statement in which he accused Moscow, of course, Russia's capital, of paying millions of dollars to a lobbying firm in order to help Bill Clinton's charities and thereby influence Hillary Clinton. That's his claim. It's not demonstrated, proven, but it is his claim, and there seems to be some basis for it given some of the factors I just described. Now, Campbell said this about Russian nuclear officials. I'll read you the quote. That they told him various times that they expected APCO to apply a portion of the $3 million annual lobbying fee it was receiving from the Russians to provide in-kind support for the Clinton Global Initiative. Now, APCO is a global affairs consulting agency. So what he was saying was, let's take $3 million in annual lobbying money that the Russians gave to APCO and give it through in-kind support to the Clinton Global Initiative, the former president's major charity, in addition to the Clinton Foundation.
Right.
Now, here's one more quote. The contract called for 4 payments of $750,000 over 12 months. APCO was expected to give assistance free of charge to the Clinton Global Initiative as part of their effort to create a favorable environment to ensure the Obama administration made affirmative decisions on everything from Uranium One to the U.S.-Russia Civilian Nuclear Cooperation Agreement. Now, of course, APCO is denying these allegations, but basically what they're saying is that according to this agreement that was signed, there would be 4 payments of $750,000 over a 12-month period. That's a heck of a lot of money. Now, the APCO was going to give free assistance as a result of this exchange to the Clinton Global Initiative. The idea was to make things more favorable for this agreement to happen. So there's a lot of supposition here on the part of Corsi based on some of these statements, taking it at face value and saying what Douglas Campbell was testifying to is absolutely true. I believe it's likely true, but there's some questions still swirling about the informant, Douglas Campbell, and what his background is, those kinds of things. Just one more thing. It's important to know, as I mentioned before, that Robert Mueller, who's overseeing the Russia investigation, was overseeing the FBI at the time that this extortion and corruption of Rosatom, again, the Russian company that acquired Uranium One, the company that now possesses access to as much as 20% of America's uranium storage material. Now, also, at the time, the FBI was headed by then Assistant FBI Director Andrew McCabe, and also then U.S. Attorney Rod Rosenstein, who's now Deputy Attorney General in the Trump administration. McCabe quit this January. I think he disgraced himself in terms of being very political in how he handled things in the FBI. And former federal prosecutor Andy McCarthy, who I mentioned before, pointed out that the cool $500,000 the Putin regime funneled to Bill Clinton for a speaking fee was 5 times the amount it spent on those Facebook ads that Russia began doing in 2015. Right. So there are a lot of questions swirling about this, and something doesn't smell right, Chris.
Yeah, and one of the things I've heard, love to get your comment on, is that whether it's the informant or the information the Justice Department had, I've heard the school of thought repeated several times that had that been out there, the deal would not have been approved. Is that your take on that?
Had which not been out there?
I get the information the Justice Department had, as well as what may have come out of the FBI informant, that information wasn't presented, yet had it been, that the deal would not have gone through.
I think that is a strong possibility here, particularly because what we're talking about is information that showed that the Russians were dirty in this deal, and the folks that were in the agencies that make these final determinations simply were not apprised of this. Now, had they been, there's a good chance that I think that the deal would have been scrubbed, even if the Clintons really wanted it. Now, then again, the Clintons, being as sneaky and conniving as they are, could certainly have done something more in order to get the deal to happen, even if the information was provided. So, I mean, I don't know that we can say for certain, but that's my supposition.
Okay. And about Robert Mueller, who's certainly turning out to be an interesting figure, because on one hand, I'm reading about his involvement in the Clinton scandal, and then it's almost as if what people are speculating about him, he's saying the exact same thing about Trump at the same time, saying Trump was the one colluding with the Russians to rig the election. So can you give a little overview on all these things happening with Mueller and how you see that playing out and where this might lead to?
You mean in terms of the Russian investigation or tying in with Uranium One? Because I'm not sure how much of a tie-in there really is between the two.
Just that it seems almost as if the things that many people believe he's done in terms of being involved with Russia in the Uranium One scandal, now there's I don't know if it's a case yet, but basically he's saying Trump was colluding with the Russians, and it's like, I think a lot of people are just confused about which side is this guy on and which...
You know, it's interesting. You talk to some people who know Robert Mueller, and they think very highly of him, that he's an honest broker. He may well be, but there's a lot of questions, I think. There are a lot of questions about Mueller's reliability, given that he was director of the FBI during so much of this time. Right. And prior to when James Comey took over as FBI chief. So, you know, I do think there's one other factor, too, with regards to Russia, is that he's very close to James Comey. James Comey worked for him. They worked very closely back during his times as the FBI's director. So, you know, the whole Comey thing is that there's all these issues with regards to him being a witness in this, and all of this, you know, controversy that he has tried to bring out for the Trump administration. You know, I really think that that is one of the suspect portions to this. But I've interviewed Ken Starr, who was, of course, the special prosecutor during the Clinton scandals of the 1990s, and he thinks very highly of Bob Mueller. He worked with him. He worked with Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, and he thinks that they are top-notch people. He's got some questions about, if I recall correctly, some questions about some of the conflicts of interest of some of the people who worked for Bob Mueller in this investigation, the Russia investigation. But, you know, that's about the extent of it for him. So I don't know. I have some questions about Mueller. I really think he should step down, though. I think the way he's handled the Russia investigation has been, in my mind, maddening in some ways.
Right. So what is the resolution or the next step, or how do we, what are you looking for in terms of getting some more clarification on what actually did or didn't happen?
Well, one idea is to have a special counsel conduct an investigation, or to maybe provide some direction to Bob Mueller and the existing special counsel to look into it. But I don't think that would be very good, because Mueller was involved in the directing the FBI during this time period. So I think there's a strong case for a special counsel to actually be put into investigating this story, just as there's a case for a few other stories to have special counsels like this. There's a situation going on right now with a FISA warrant, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, that was acquired using this dossier about Trump from the campaign. That dossier was used in order to get a FISA warrant on an individual named Carter Page. And so there's arguments to be made that that should have a special counsel investigate it, or at least you redirect Bob Mueller to examine that particular issue. So there are a couple of different investigations that really should have special counsels. And I think the Uranium One scandal arguably is one, because the FBI is involved and seems problematic. The Clintons are certainly involved, seem problematic. A lot of issues here.
So is that going to happen? I mean, it sounds like the one thing we know for sure is that it's a complete mess one way or another. Is there going to be, and let's say, a legitimate investigation? Because it seems like sometimes some of these things that we get thrown out there are, just for show. But do you think we'll see a legitimate effort to find out? And again, if the Clintons are innocent, then hopefully they would be vindicated. If they're not, then, but in either case, really find out what happened.
Yeah, it really comes down to whether or not Attorney General Jeff Sessions decides to appoint a special counsel on this. And Trump has been chiding.
He hasn't been having a good couple weeks either.
Yeah, no, he hasn't been well appreciated by President Trump on this, who really wants an investigation. The problem is with even though I said I think there should be a special counsel investigation, the problem is giving the appearance of going after your political enemies. And that, I think, is why Jeff Sessions is very hesitant to do it, and why I think at the very beginning President Trump was hesitant to do it. But there needs to be something looked into this, because it does not, as I said before, pass the smell test.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't sound good. I guess for people who are still a little bit new to this, even being somewhat familiar, there's so many details that can be mind-boggling. But is there any documents or sources that, again, for folks who don't, or maybe do or don't have a pre-justified opinion, but really just want to find out for themselves, not take my opinion or anyone else, but figure out for themselves what's real evidence or what they can look into to.
Yeah. The one thing that I think would be good is there's a lot of writing that you can find from, I mentioned before, Andrew McCarthy. He writes for the National Review, and he's done some exceptional analysis about the backstories and what it means and all of those kinds of things, especially as a federal prosecutor. So I would definitely say take a look at some of Andy McCarthy's work. And then I know that it's got a partisan tint to it, because Fox News is right wing, and that's unequivocal. There are a lot of good reporters that are there that are fair and balanced, some good daytime fair and balanced shows, and there's been some good reporting on foxnews.com and by some folks at Fox News on this particular issue, because since it involves the Clintons, the other media outlets aren't very interested in focusing any attention on it. So again, I know that Fox has bias inherent in it, but there's a lot of factual issues that are in play here that I think they've done a good job at laying out.
Okay. And any timeline for how this resolves going forward? Or are we on typical U.S. legal time, which means years pass by and just hope for the best?
U.S. legal time, years pass by, just hope for the best. How about that?
Yeah. And before we let you run here today, I saw Gary Cohn. Looks like he just resigned. Obviously, people have seen several of the members in Trump's cabinet walk away at various points. Any thoughts about that, or just any other developments
Yeah,
going on now?
I'll just share this real quickly before I have to go. And that is, I'm disappointed that Gary Cohn's resigned. I know that he's a Goldman Sachs guy, and there are certainly issues that some might suggest with Goldman Sachs being in the White House. But I don't know. I'm not pointing any figures. But the thing is that I think Cohn, while I disagree with him on certain things, I think it was a voice of reason on the issue of trade. And it's very unfortunate in my mind that Trump is going down this protectionist path, and that Gary Cohn saw fit to leave the administration instead of trying to tame the future movements of the Trump presidency with regards to trade. So I'm disappointed in that regard. I think the tariffs, I call them Trump's trade tariff tragedy, because I find it to be incredibly flawed for a number of reasons, but that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah, well, certainly the free market school of thought, anytime you start doing tariffs or trade wars, it's the people that lose. So I'm stunned. Apparently I'm agreeing with Goldman Sachs on something. So who knows what'll happen next. But again, to find out more and stay tuned, everyone can tune into 1690 KDMT here in Denver on the Business for Breakfast show. And also, what time is your show on 710 KNUS, which focuses a bit more on the politics?
Yeah, Business for Breakfast is 6 to 9 Mountain Time, weekday mornings. And then 710 KNUS, the Jimmy Sengenberger show, runs 5 to 8 Mountain Time in the evenings.
All right. Well, we'll get those links underneath so people know how to find you. And just want to say thanks for coming on. I know it's a confusing situation, but at least hopefully this gives people a little more of an overview and perhaps a place to get started to go verify for themselves and make their own opinions.
If I could point out publicly that Chris Marcus supports a position of a Goldman Sachs guy.
No.
Chris, it's been a pleasure.
We need some censorship, finally. Thanks, Jimmy. I appreciate it. And we will see you again soon, my friend.
You bet.